One of my great-grandfathers times five was a Presbyterian minister. His father was the teaching elder at Paisley in Ayr, and his father before him and his grandfather before that were the ministers at Muircook Kirk in Ayr. And James was educated first at Glasgow and then at the University of Edinburgh, the most prominent Protestant seminary in the world. And he was ordained in London, and he was deemed a man of bright possibilities. And he was called to a church in Bermuda, and there he married his wife, Elizabeth Wardlaw. And in 1787, he published a book of his sermons that sort of took the Protestant world aback. And a few years later, he was called to to serve the Presbyterian Church at Alexandria, Virginia. He was there for 2 years, and at the same time, he studied at Yale and received a Doctor of Divinity at Yale. And he was prominent at a time when everybody in this very small part of the world had very big roles. And he was a much beloved pastor at the time. And he, being a Presbyterian, Presbyterians were the Church of the Scottish Enlightenment. Their role in the world was to make the world a better place for when Christ came. And the way they did that was often with schools. He started a school called the Alexandria Academy because there were no schools for anybody, especially not poor children. And one of the patrons for his school was a guy named George Washington. And being in Alexandria, he was surrounded with Revolutionary War soldiers everywhere. He was just part of the milieu. When the capital of the United States was moved from Philadelphia to the newly formed District of Columbia, he was there and said the invocation at the laying of the stone. He taught the school until the schools became free for everyone in Alexandria, and then he turned the Alexandria Academy into a school for slave children, also funded by George Washington. And his congregation was just sort of the center of the world. And he was a nice guy, and everyone loved him. He stayed at Alexandria his entire career for 30 years. He's buried in a marble vault behind the church today and right next to the tomb of the unknown Revolutionary War soldier. I can't say a lot about his life and ministry. I've read his diaries. I've not been able to find his correspondence with his son. He had 2 daughters and he had a son named Samuel. And Samuel was supposed to carry on the family business of being Presbyterian minister. So they sent Sam back from Alexandria to Edinburgh to study at the seminary there. But Sam fooled them all and enrolled in the College of Surgeons, which was at the time one of the most prestigious medical schools in the entire world. And he got his degree, and he came back to the United States, stopped off at Alexandria, and joined the Army. He joined the Army. He was posted at Fort Edwards on the Mississippi River. And back at that time, the Mississippi River was sort of the edge. The land had just been purchased from Spain as part of France as part of the Louisiana Purchase. Fort Edwards was the southern post at the confluence of the Des Moines River and the Mississippi, and it was also home to Keokuk. That's another line of my family. At the time, my Puritan ancestors were settling New York, New Jersey, moving into Pennsylvania. My Sauk ancestors were moving out of Great Lakes and onto the plains. So Samuel found himself at Fort Edwards guarding the Indian villages on the other side of the river at what's now Keokuk, Iowa. And he was prominent. He was this highly educated man living in a frontier fort, and there's a history of that. At the same time, all of the Europeans around him are Métis traders and fur people traveling into the interior. But the stories are pretty well recorded. A young woman named Mcclurken needed a husband. She dreamed her husband. That husband was Samuel Muir, and she went to the fort. She found him and she married him, and he married her, and everything was fine up until probably about 10 years later. The fort got a new commanding officer who ordered him to put away his Indian wife and send the kids back to the Indian village. And several people recorded his response to that. He had his youngest daughter with him, and he said, God forbid that a son of Albion would disown his infant child or his clan. And he refused. And of course, he lost his commission.